What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in this video I'm going to be going through my week 5 wide receiver start sits. If you guys are new to the channel or new to this style of video, going to be going through every single week 5 matchup, talking about every single fantasy relevant wide receiver, and then listing them as either a start, fringe option, or a sit. The starts are going to be typically your wide receiver 1s, wide receiver 2s, the players you feel very confident throwing into your lineup. The fringe options, these are going to be like your wide receiver 3s, your flex options. They're suitable. You may not love it, but they could kind of slide into somewhere in your lineup. I do think the bars to kind of get into the start and fringe categories are going to be a little bit lower this week because we do have bye weeks for the first time this season. So we have 4 teams on bye. It is the Browns, Chargers, Seahawks, and Buccaneers. So definitely some fantasy relevant wide receivers on those rosters. So obviously you may have to make some tough calls if you do have some players on bye this week. If you guys like the video, just hit that like button. Would really appreciate it. Any fantasy questions, drop them down below. I'll also have my running back, quarterback, and tight end videos out today also. But let's just dive right into it. We're going to start off here in the Thursday night matchup. Bears taking on the Commanders. For the Bears here, I feel like DJ Moore is a start at this point. Even when Justin Fields was struggling through the first 3 weeks, he was still giving you solid production. He puts up another strong game in week 4. So pretty much aside from week 1, he has been a decent option on your fantasy football rosters. This is also a game where the Bears are going to be pretty decent underdogs here against the Commanders. So we're probably in store for at least a decent amount of passing volume out of this offense. I think Moore slots in as a nice back end wide receiver 2 play. On the other side for the Commanders, I do think Terry McLaurin is someone I'd be looking to sell high on, but I also think that this is a really strong matchup here against the Bears. Bears defense, I mean, just really anything. You want to run it, go ahead. You want to pass it, go ahead also. They're going to give up a lot of points. I think the Commanders can capitalize on that. I think Terry McLaurin is their clear-cut wide receiver 1, so I fire him up as a start. I guess you can make an argument for Dotson or Curtis Samuel to be a fringe option. For me, I would just prefer to avoid it. I did like Dotson coming into the season. Really hasn't panned out through 4 weeks. Now, shifting over to the Sunday slate, we're going to have the Jaguars taking on the Bills. For the Jaguars, I think you fire up Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk as starts. Ridley has been a little bit disappointing, at least from where I had him ranked heading into the season. Through 4 weeks, hasn't necessarily been like the wide receiver 1 production I was expecting. Not totally giving up on it. I still think he's a locked-in start. But Christian Kirk has been very, very impressive with Zay Jones out. I mean, after week 1, Christian Kirk was not in a good spot. His snaps were not great, coming off a down game. Then Zay Jones goes down. Christian Kirk sliding into those 2 wide receiver sets, and he has been great. So you got to fire up both of those guys. And then for the Bills, Stephon Diggs coming off of a massive week 4 game. And then Gabriel Davis here. I have him as a fringe option. Personally, I'd prefer to not have Gabe Davis in my lineup, but I've also been historically lower on him than consensus. I do think he slides into that fringe category with the bye weeks. He just doesn't command a ton of volume. So he's averaging 4.5 targets per game, but he also has 3 straight double-digit fantasy point games because he scored touchdowns in 3 straight games. So he has that big playability. He has that touchdown upside in this offense, but the weekly floor is just very, very low. So always going to be a tough call with Gabe Davis if you have him on your roster. Now moving over to the Texans Falcons matchup. For the Texans here, monster game out of Nico Collins. He has to be viewed as a wide receiver 2 at this point. 9 targets, 7 receptions, 168 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns. This is his second 25-plus PPR point game through 4 games of the NFL season. Like I said, locked in wide receiver 2 at this point. I do view him as their wide receiver 1. I know Tank Dell was getting some steam last week. I still like Tank Dell. I have him listed as a fringe option. I'm not giving up after his 1 reception, 16-yard game. Those are going to happen. He's a rookie. He's also a big-time playmaker. He's not this low A-dot slot guy that I think people would kind of expect just looking at his frame. He's not that guy. He's playing outside. So I still think if you have Tank Dell, you picked him off waivers, I would still feel very optimistic about him moving forward. He has flashed legit talent early on, and this was also just his first down game as a starter. He didn't start in week 1, so you can't really dock him there. And then CJ Stroud has just looked wildly impressive through 4 weeks, so I think you got to like these wide receivers moving forward. I will be sitting Robert Woods. And then for the Falcons here, Drake London is just going to be in this fringe territory. Clearly very talented. Desmond Ritter's just not it. I do think if we get some more Desmond Ritter's kind of struggle games, a Taylor Heineke move to quarterback would be pretty interesting for these weapons. It feels like Kyle Pitts is a lost cause at this point, not like long-term dynasty-wise, but for redraft, he's clearly not 100%, has not found a role in this offense. It's not looking good for redraft. Still really like Pitts long-term for dynasty, but in terms of Drake London, a switch to Taylor Heineke could make him someone you feel confident starting as like a wide receiver too. I totally believe he has that talent as a player. This passing attack is just not it. So I think he'll be like a wide receiver 3 flex option. But if Taylor Heineke does get that quarterback spot, I think Drake London becomes pretty interesting. And this is also not like a long shot to happen, right? Like at this point, if you're Arthur Smith, you're looking at Desmond Ridder, you're trying to compete this season in that division. So if Ritter's not getting it done, you probably don't think he's the long-term answer. Maybe they do end up pivoting to Heineke. Personally, obviously, I would love to see it. But now moving over to the Panthers Lions game, I have Adam Thielen as a fringe option, and I feel like some people are going to be upset that he is not a locked-in start. He has been really impressive through 4 weeks. I totally thought he was cooked after last season. He ran the second most routes in the NFL as the wide receiver 2 opposite Justin Jefferson, who was taking a ton of attention, and he pretty much did nothing. Like his production was almost non-existent in that role. It was wildly disappointing, so I thought he was done. Then he goes to this Panthers offense and is averaging 17.6 PPR points per game through 4 weeks, and so people probably are going to be upset I have him as a fringe option. I just can't justify listing a wide receiver as a start when their starting quarterback is averaging 168 passing yards per game. Bryce Young has not been, lighting it up in terms of passing volume, and not saying it's his fault. Like, this offense is just not very talented all around, but you just have to be such an elite wide receiver talent to, really actually trust someone in such a low volume passing attack. So I have him as a fringe option. He's probably like a high-end wide receiver 3, but that is the explanation for why he's not a start for me. And then going to be sitting DJ Chark on the other side with the Lions. You continue to fire up Amon-Ra St. Brown as like a mid to high-end wide receiver 1. Dude's a stud. Keep him rolling in your lineup. Jameson Williams, very interesting this week. I really wouldn't be shocked if he's not overly involved here in week 5, but he had his suspension reduced, so he can play here in the week 5 game against the Panthers. I do think he has a shot to earn this wide receiver 2 role. Totally worth rostering, but I'm not overly optimistic about his fantasy production here in his first game back. Then we're going to have the Titans taking on the Colts. I have D-Hop as a fringe option here, like a wide receiver flex play. He wasn't a full-time player in terms of snaps in week 4. I would have to imagine that's due to him being banged up with that ankle injury. He only had a 69% route participation. Still was fine fantasy-wise, like 4 receptions, 63 yards. But hopefully we are getting some like positive injury reports throughout the week that would make me feel more comfortable starting him as like a wide receiver 3 or a flex play. Sitting Nick Westbrook-Ikine and Treylon Burks. Then for the Colts, Michael Pittman, crazy hot start to the season. Had a little bit of a cool down here in week 4, but not concerned. Richardson really flashed, made some impressive throws. This Colts offense is better than I think a lot of people thought. So you continue to fire up Michael Pittman as a nice wide receiver 2, and then sitting my guy Josh Downs. Really like him long term, but here in week 5, not overly interested fantasy-wise. Now pivoting over to the Giants-Dolphins matchup, this Giants offense is really a mess. I had some optimism for Daniel Jones heading into this season. This is just not a good unit. The offensive line is terrible. They can't get anything going. That was supposed to be like their get-right game against that Seahawks defense, and it really just turned into a showcase for all the Seahawks defensive players. So not a great look. All these wide receivers have to be sits. Not necessarily super relevant for redraft, but Wan'Dale Robinson with a pretty encouraging game coming off of that ACL tear last season. It's good to see him making an impact. I don't know if you're ever going to trust him like in the 2023 season in your lineup, but for you guys playing Dynasty, interesting option. But yeah, all these wide receivers are sits. On the other side, for the Dolphins, you fire up Tyreek Hill, fire up Jalen Waddle. I still think Waddle is a really nice buy low. Kind of underperformed through 4 games, missed week 3, but this is still a top-tier offense. One slight slip against the Bills isn't going to pivot me off of these guys. And then Braxton Berrios had a really nice week 4 performance, but he will be a sit for me here in week 5. Then we are going to have the Saints taking on the Patriots. For the Saints, pretty much have the same lineup as I've had throughout the season. Chris Olave, you fire him up as a wide receiver 1. Had his first down game of the season, but still all in on him. Derek Carr has not been great at the quarterback position, but kind of what you signed up for. No one was expecting like a top 10 quarterback with Chris Olave. Fringe, Michael Thomas, he stays in this spot. He's averaging 11 PPR points per game through 4 weeks. That's with 0 touchdowns, so it's solid. He's at least 50 yards in every game, so his floor has been pretty high. He's like a wide receiver 3 flex play at this point. And then sitting Rashid Shaheed, even though his routes have gone up, he hasn't really capitalized on it. Like he had some flash plays in week 1 and week 2, week 3 and week 4 with the increased usage. Hasn't really been great fantasy-wise. On the other side for the Patriots, just have to be sitting these wide receivers. The Patriots offense is a struggle busting it at this point. Next game, we have the Ravens taking on the Steelers. Little divisional matchup here. The only start I have in this game is going to be Zay Flowers. A little bit of a down game. It was kind of like the Mark Andrews show. The Ravens really kind of put it on the Browns defense. That was unexpected. I think Lamar has looked really impressive through 4 weeks, especially as a passer. So I think you got to be feeling good about that if you are someone who rosters Zay Flowers. Much easier matchup here against the Steelers defense. The Steelers secondary is not it. I think Zay Flowers is a nice wide receiver 2 for you. If Odell Beckham or Rashad Bateman are able to give it a go in this game, would be sitting both of those guys. Then for the Steelers, George Pickens as a fringe option. He hasn't been able to rack up like these super high volume games, even with Deontay Johnson out. So at this point, he's kind of more of a wide receiver 3 in my mind. Now we're going to have the Bengals taking on the Cardinals. For the Bengals, you fire up Jamar Chase. Even with Burrow struggling the last 2 weeks, he has found ways to give you decent fantasy production. I have T. Higgins as a start. I have no confidence he's going to end up playing in this game, dealing with a fractured rib. I think he said like he might give it a go this week or could return next week. If he plays, he's probably like a fringe wide receiver 2, so you wouldn't feel great about it, but he's still playable. If he doesn't give it a go, I still probably have Tyler Boyd as a sit. Joe Burrow's just looked really rough. Even in a good matchup here against the Cardinals, like Burrow hasn't looked good enough to me where I think he balls out in like a plus matchup. Like that's just not what we've seen out of him so far. Obviously, he's toughened it out through the injury, but we definitely have to take that into account. On the other side for the Cardinals, I was pretty high on Hollywood Brown heading into the season, and he's even come in and completely outperformed my expectations for him early on. Like when I was drafting Marquise Brown, I was like, all right, he might be rough early on. Maybe he can command some volume, like with whatever quarterback's playing there before Kyler gets back. But then you have a Kyler who's probably not running the ball a ton. Then that's where Marquise Brown could really ball out. He's been very impressive through 4 weeks with Josh Dobbs, 15 PPR points per game, 27 targets over the past 3 weeks. And then Josh Dobbs at quarterback has just looked significantly better than I think pretty much anyone was expecting through 4 weeks of the NFL season. Now shifting over to the Eagles-Rams matchup, A.J. Brown with a big day. He was due. You still fire at both of these dudes, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, locked in weekly starts. And then for the Rams, very interesting kind of wide receiver setup this week. Cooper Kupp has the opportunity to come off the PUP list, could make his season debut here in week 5. If Cooper Kupp is active, I'm playing Cooper Kupp, and regardless of if Cooper Kupp is playing, I am playing Puka Nacua. At this point, 4 weeks in, like there's no fluke argument, there's no like, oh, he's just like a system player or whatever. Even if Cooper Kupp is playing, Puka Nacua has proven that he is the real deal at this point, so he's a start regardless. I think Tutu Atwell's like a fringe option if Kupp is back. If Kupp doesn't play, you could probably make an argument for him being a top 24 guy at the wide receiver position. So that's how I view those Rams wide receivers. Now moving over to the Jets-Broncos matchup here. Week 4 had to be very encouraging if you are a Garrett Wilson owner. Zach Wilson looked much improved in Week 4 going up against the Chiefs. He was seeking out Garrett Wilson. They were getting him lots of looks. So that's a huge plus. I like him as a start this week. Great matchup going up here against the Broncos. We just saw Justin Fields, who had looked rough through 3 weeks, completely torch the Broncos through the air. So you got to be feeling good about Garrett Wilson in this matchup. Sitting Allen Lazard, still like looking at these pass catchers, Garrett Wilson's really the only guy I'd feel confident playing. On the other side for the Broncos, overall just not a great situation here. Like outside of Russ in terms of the Broncos' offensive weapons, kind of just feels gross. The running back room feels like they're on the verge of a three-headed committee. And on offense, like passing the ball, they really like to spread the ball around. Sutton has actually been pretty consistent, his fourth straight double-digit PPR point game, but he was kind of saved by a touchdown in this game, not a ton of volume. Jerry Jeudy has been underwhelming to start off the season. Like when you've looked at how much of a jump Russ took from last year, it's been a pretty significant jump, and you would kind of hope that Jeudy would go from like that back-end wide receiver 2 to potentially mid to high-end wide receiver 2. That is not what we've seen so far. I think both are like wide receiver 3s this week. But then you also have Marvin Mims there, who continues to ball out in a limited workload. You have to expect at some point that he's going to up his routes and then just continue to eat into Jeudy and Sutton's opportunities. So Jeudy and Sutton are going to be fringe plays. Mims is a sit, but I do hope we get to see an expanded role for Marvin Mims here in Week 5. Then pivoting over to the Chiefs-Vikings matchup. Chiefs wide receiver room, just got to fade it. Rashee Rice, Sky Moore, Kadarius Toney, MVS, Justin Watson, sitting all those dudes. For the Vikings, Justin Jefferson, wide receiver 1, fire him up. And then I have Jordan Addison as a fringe option. Unfortunately, he's still running the wide receiver 3 routes, coming off a goose egg game, but I still just think he's talented enough in an offense that's pretty high volume passing. I like him as a wide receiver 3 flex option. And then we have the Cowboys taking on the 49ers. Very fun matchup here. For the Cowboys, you fire up CeeDee Lamb as a wide receiver 1. Brandon Cooks, pretty disappointing through 4 weeks. Michael Gallup has shown some flashes the last 2 weeks in Week 3 and Week 4. I still have those guys as sits. Michael Gallup, maybe you're desperate. You have a lot of wide receivers on bye. I guess he's potentially playable. On the other side for the 49ers, a big game for Brandon Ayuk. Deebo Samuel with very strange game. Ran 20 routes, like his route participation was great. Was not targeted a single time, logged a few carries. You just got to go back to the well on Deebo. Even if he's a little bit banged up, you still got to fire him up in your lineup as at worst like a wide receiver 2. And then the final game of the week, Monday Night Football, the Packers taking on the Raiders. For the Packers, we got Christian Watson's debut in Week 4. It was a limited role. His route participation was right around 50%, so not anywhere near what you're expecting here in Week 5. They had a long kind of week and a half off because they were on that Thursday night game, now playing on Monday night. So Watson should have a much larger role. I like him as a wide receiver 2. Romeo Doubs, I think he's earned the right to be a fringe option here. Impressive in 3 out of the 4 games, 18 plus PPR points in those 3 contests. And then I'm going to be sitting Jaden Reed. He's definitely shown some flashes, but like I said, I expect Watson back to more of like a starter's workload. And then Doubs kind of separated himself from Jaden Reed in terms of getting like the wide receiver. It was the wide receiver 1 snaps last week, which I think turns into like, top 2 wide receiver snaps when Watson is good to go. And then for the Raiders, you fire up Devontae Adams. Seems like he's banged up, but if he's active, he's in your lineup. And then Jacoby Myers, not a great Week 4 game. He was someone who I really liked when paired with Jimmy Garoppolo because Jimmy was really seeking him out in the 2 games they played together. We did not see the same thing with him playing with Aiden O'Connell. So he's going to be a fringe option for me. Hopefully Jimmy G is able to give it a go, and that would be a bump for Jacoby Myers. But that's going to wrap it up for all 14 Week 5 wide receiver matchups. If you guys enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Go check out the running back, quarterback, and tight end videos. Thank you all for stopping by. Any questions, drop them down below. Thank you again, and I will see you in the next one.